Here we go. All right. The settings got mixed up again. I got overexcited and hit my desk. Hello, welcome to Varn Vlog. And tonight I am freeforming it. I had a slight case of overposting, and which is bad for your health. Where I decided to fight with everyone on the left because it was something to do. But in all seriousness, I've been sitting down pondering where we are um politically right now, and the kind of cope which is represented by a whole lot of different things, including this whole practical leftism of people cheerleading for geopolitics in one way or the other, honestly, in any direction, as if that geopolitics was a viable politics for them. Like, to make meaningful forays into geopolitics, you actually have to have a viable domestic politics to do that. Otherwise, you're just screaming into the void, which is what most of us are doing. Is what I'm doing right now, except you're interacting with these void screams like an interactive part of my nebulous conception of reality. And look, the reason why I don't do a lot of these kinds of streams is because about 5 years ago, after an appearance with Michael Brooks and Douglas Lane at a conference in Boise, Idaho, at the University of Boise, University of Idaho. I'm not sure which one it was actually. It was set up by a student group there and by Zero Books back when we all worked for them. Back when it was owned by a different group of people. And I remember being asked to be the Jordan Peterson of the left because I would tell people to clean their room, as if, confusing a stern attitude and a tendency towards being a mild dom is actually the same thing as having a consistent politics. But, I took that as well as I could, as opposed to taking it as an obvious wish for me to get addicted to benzos, become a religious fanatic without actually believing in God, or at least not being able to answer the question, do you believe in God, in less than 4,000 words and a bunch of references to Jung, sounding about as prolix as Derrida while complaining about postmodern neo-Marxism. I mean, the funny thing about postmodern neo-Marxism is that it was explicitly post-Marxist and might even be explicitly framed as anti-Marxist from people who got burnt by the French Communist Party in the 1970s, right? Like, that would be the historical record there. Yet, the Jordan Peterson doesn't know that, but neither most of the audience at that event. And I remember thinking that, like, wanting me to be your life coach was a bad sell, because people who want to be life coaches rarely ever should be life coaches. Like, if you were successful in life, you would go do that. So whatever. Now, should we talk about, old defunct parasocial relationships? No, I mean, we shouldn't. But my point here, then, the title is between Failsons, Directional Categories, Hard Truths, or Barbarism, is that I honestly think we need to just pick the side of the barbarians a lot of the time. Most of us are there already anyway. I was recently asked, what I thought of the left. And I was like, well, the millennial left was a bunch of downwardly mobile middle-class fail-sons who were often in a precarious position in an elite sector of the working class, or in a fairly protected government-subsidized part of the petit bourgeois, in major metropolitan areas, who glommed onto a real need and recognition for change that never happened during the Obama administration. And instead of burning the Democratic Party to the ground, these people followed the Pied Piper of new leftists back into that party and saved it effectively. Temporarily, though, as the current election makes very clear. So when people go to me, I'm like, Bernie should have listened to the critique of Black Democrats, and I was like, well, conservative Black Democrats in the South aren't going to vote for Bernie Sanders because they're a fairly elite strata of that community that have a precarious electoral politics worked out with conservatives in that state and in Georgia and in all the South, particularly when the Dixiecrats abandoned their political apparatuses, which they weren't voted out of, I might add. They weren't defeated. They simply changed the D to an R when there was different winners in those states. I've repeated this over and over and over again. I've found the political articles that talked about it indirectly. I've noticed that they've been edited to be less direct about it over time. That's interesting. But nonetheless, I've done it before. If you want me to dig them up again, I'll see what I can do. My point, and I lived through it, so it's also lived experience. My point about that is that, yes, you can be right about the problems of the Bernie Sanders campaign and wrong about what you think the answer is. And so, too, with geopolitics. Recently, there was a post made by the Midwestern Marks about loser leftists not getting on the condolences to Iran over the death of the president. Now, I don't know anything about how the president's helicopter went down. Could have been a sincere accident. Could have been an Israeli activist. Could have been an internal activist even. Who the fuck knows? It is irresponsible to speculate yet. But, and I'm not here to spit on his grave, actually. He's just a president of a semi-theocratic partial democracy, which is as democratic as the U.S. is in a lot of ways. You know, replace a bunch of mullahs for the Senate, but there you go. My point, however, was not to like join on the people celebrating this man's death. I have, no real horse in this game whatsoever. My point was, why should leftists care about what heads of state do? Particularly like, Western leftists, you guys lose so much, but it is the brilliant anti-imperialism that stands against the tides of it. Cool, right? On specifically Palestine, the Iranian government has played a progressive role. But that's one issue. My dog's not in that fight, man. All right. If anything, now I'm not one of these people who say, oh, your only responsibility is to your own country. But since I am in the Imperial Core, and as being in the Imperial Core, wanting my government to get involved in anything is generally a bad idea, including domestically, fucking frankly. But I definitely don't want the U.S. messing around with anything in Iran one way or the other. All right. Yes, the sanctions are bad. By the way, everyone should expect sanctions regimes. It's like crying that the Soviet Union failed because it failed to deal with hostile capitalists. Did you fucking think the capitalists weren't going to be hostile? Did not every bit of our theory for the 100 years prior to even that happening, before even Marx was the thing, indicate that they would be hostile? Come on. That's getting mad that you lost at a rigged game that you knew was rigged before you even made a character in it. Ugh. It's not really a response. So, yeah, let's cry a river that Biden's... I mean, actually, Biden sent condolences to the Iranian government even. What's that about, right? So when we talk about efficacy, like, Western West, if you have failed, but I am going to praise another government and pretend that their success, and I don't know what about this is a success. I mean, I guess the fact that Iran as a government still exists is a success from the standpoint of the Iranian government. Sure. Right? But I'm often thinking about Lenin's writing about Kautsky being soft on the German war effort because as Kautsky said, well, maybe we could consider it progressive because of Serbian national liberation, a cause which Lenin supported under most other conditions, but he chastised Kautsky for picking the German Empire over two empires he considered to be worse, his own and the and the and the British Empire. You know, the two bastions of world reaction, one capitalist, one pre-capitalist, are transitioning to capitalist, but nonetheless, that was Lenin's stance, right? Marx, I went looking for it when Marx praised heads of states. I can find one letter to the International Workingmen's Association in 1865, him praising and mourning the death of Abraham Lincoln. That's it. Like, maybe there's more somewhere. I can't find it. So as Marxist, should we care about, like, the fact that Biden did or did not sing condolences is a matter of diplomacy that's really not worth a whole lot? Woo, woo. But if you want to win and worship winners, then why be a leftist? I mean, yes, we want to win. That's not what I'm saying. I see how you can misconstrue that. And yes, like, there's all kinds of negative tendencies on the Western left. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the Western left, for a variety of reasons, has decoupled itself from a workers' movement, largely due to deindustrialization. It wasn't even an act of will. Particularly when that workers' movement got cut first. Actually, if you look at the decoupling from the workers' movement and this attempt to recouple that's happened in the last decade, kind of, the first thing is that the back end of the New Deal coalition had a poison pill in it in the NCRB, which also meant that the federal involvement with the unions could lead to stuff like the Taft-Hartley Act, which lead to kicking all the communists and anarchists out of the unions formally as a condition of remaining in the AFL-CIO. That was a poison pill that was there from the beginning. All right. This being not really resisted by the unions themselves is part of why the left turned on those unions in the first place. Because they were given payouts during the height of American economic power. Now, the irony I've always talked about a third world is the third worldism got codified in the West in the 1980s by people reviving lost ideas that were played with during the Sino-Soviet split beginning about three worlds theory. Three worlds got redefined. In China, originally, the three worlds were the US and the USSR together. That was the first world. The second world was Europe, and the third world was and I guess the lesser partners in the in the Warsaw Pact, and the third world was the non-aligned movement. When third worldism got revived in the 1980s in the West, the categories were shifted because we had to ignore, for example, that Mao shook Nixon's hand and cooperated with the U.S. to help the Khmer Rouge against the Vietnamese, which weirdly Maoist sectarians today just revive for reasons that I guess you need to get your historical reenactment right and defend a movement that is objectively in the dustbin of history. But you can go do that because I guess that's important to some people. I guess it also maintains to deal with certain geopolitical tensions between two governments that on paper look like they would get along, the Chinese and the Vietnamese, which very much do not. They both accuse each other of being national chauvinists, which, of course, there's probably some elements of both governments that are. I mean, what government does not have someone in it who's a national chauvinist? The Cubans, maybe? Anyway. So what are we doing here? Like, and I've really thought about this turn to geopolitics in a lot of ways, because for me, I do think we should really look at the way, like, we should see through the way this has been sold to us. Watching people who are ostensibly anti-government celebrate NATO is weird. Watching people get mad at me for saying just objective truths about warfare that aren't even normative, they're just kind of factual and historical, that's weird. Me not wanting to shit on either Russians or Ukrainians as a people, that's weird, apparently. I don't know. I feel like I made some mistakes in the beginning, and I've talked about them a lot lately, but it's not like I think Russia has a left-wing government. I do, however, think that it's been cornered in by American imperialism in ways that I can't defend its actions, but I can definitely understand them. Right? Now, if understanding actions is akin to advocating them, then we're fucked. Because, I mean, how can we do proper analysis about the world as it is if we have to fear that any analysis that picks a side on a factual claim or looks at geopolitical moves leading up to an event as what prompts likely causality, that seems to me a little weird. Like, you've never seen me come on and be like, oh, Putin's politics is my politics, because they're not. I mean, I don't even know what it would mean for me to say that, honestly. And it doesn't matter if I support Russia or not. In a very real sense. Like, I don't, but I also don't have anything against the Russians and understand how this all got to where it is. All right. So, I got accused very early on. I think I've made it very clear where my sympathies lie. Of being too pro-Israeli, which is weird to me because I've been a diehard anti-Zionist for most of my life, including before it was common amongst people of any Jewish heritage at all. It used to be really alienating when I tried to go to shul. Right. So saying what I said, which is that what would likely happen after October 7th was a massacre, and that we should be planning for a ceasefire and not engaging on he said, she said shit about why this happened and just not even go there, was taken as me being a moralist, which was weird. Yeah, Bashkar, Boschkor. Let me for that. I think a lot of my audience doesn't listen to the words I say. Like, for example, I'm not an anti-imperialist. I'm not. My politics, however, isn't just anti-imperialism. There's both right-wing and left-wing anti-imperialism. Sometimes they make strategic and tactical alliances even. You have to be very careful with that. But yeah, I often feel like people don't listen. I feel like people hear the critiques that I make and apply it to the people that aren't them, right? And don't miss that I'm actually even saying a lot of stuff about myself. Like, every time I've tried to join a political party or a political grouping or a tendency, it's kind of been a clusterfuck. Why is that? Like, why can't I choose something that is both functional and not? And honestly, the only time I've ever chosen it's a union, and my union is suboptimal, as I've said many, many times in many, many different ways. But my union is something where there's their freedom of movement that are not constrained in the same way legally in legal prescribed goals, etc. Like, a political party that I would be involved in is not interested in running union stuff. And if people think I'm going to get on the side of what are effectively white-wing governments, whether or not, whatever their colors are, they're just foolish. The situation in Western Ukraine and in Eastern Ukraine is a synthetic situation that was caused by a nation-building project in the over Soviet Union. One that was incomplete and has really never really fit. And there's a bunch of ironies and historical paradoxes in that. The breakaway separatist republics actually consolidated Ukrainian identity in the West by breaking away, but nonetheless, obviously they consolidated their own identity. It's all those identities way predate the current. I mean, they even way predate the mess after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they definitely predate the beginning of the shenanigans, which I date as starting around 2002, 2003. I date it way before Euromaidan, or even before the obvious color revolutions. The Polish Lithuanian Empire. Yeah, that's a lot of it. The Empire of Sweden didn't help either. I mean, there's long histories here, and I'm going to be honest, most of the people don't study the history of Central and Eastern Europe. They don't. I mean, like, for a lot of people, Russian history begins with Soviet history, which is a fundamental misrecognition in a lot of ways. A lot of ways. Like, Stalin may have been, as Eric von Rie says, and I like Aaron von Rie's book on the political thought of Joseph Stalin, because he actually doesn't, like the anti-communists, take Joseph Stalin and be a cynical actor, but he does not try to absolve him of the consequences of his ideology. That there was kind of a synthetic nationalism to Stalin that was both very influenced by Marxism and very influenced by Marxist insistence on the national question, particularly as it developed from after the First International into the Second. I mean, if you go back and read, other than the revisionist controversy, the biggest controversies in the Second International before World War I is around the national question. Otto Bauer versus Stalin versus Lenin. And Stalin and Lenin mostly overlap, but they don't entirely overlap. And a lot of the bigger mistakes that I felt that Stalin made was actually by following elements of Lenin's policy. And Stephen Kotkin goes into this. So it's not even like a Marxist thing to point that out. I mean, it is ironic in a lot of ways that Central Europe was ethnically sorted by communists in a way that nobody else could do before them, including the fucking fascists. But nonetheless, Harun Yelnaz writes like a bit about this, that there was this faith that if you built the nationalisms and they joined internationalisms, that eventually they would go away. Just like socialism in one country, which gets misattributed to Stalin. He adopted it as a policy, he never abandoned it. But it was Bukharin's concession. But even then, they never viewed it as an answer. The socialism in one country was just to survive until they could join up with another revolution. The problem became, is both in the common turn, the Third International, and the common form, the kind of later thing that happened after World War II, something that I didn't really know about until very recently. Other national revolutionary interests were subordinated to Soviet interest. And it's hard to parse, when you read the Bordigist or the left communist or even the Trotskyist replies, you get why they're concerned about that, right? And there are things the Soviet Union is doing which are putting revolutions in other countries in dire straits. But you also have to think about what the Soviet response was. It wasn't just national chauvinism. Their argument was, we had a revolution, we're trying to survive. If you do this prematurely, we could lose everything. You might not win and we lose. Like, that's a tension that's not easily worked out. Now, in some ways today, we are crying over spilt milk. History has happened now. It may not have been inevitable. The counterfactuals are useful for playing out what we should do today. But what has happened has happened. 1992 happened. 1951 happened. World War II happened. Stalin being blindsided by Hitler because he didn't think Hitler was that irrational happened. All these things happened. All right. Like, you have this thing that I've always joked, but it's true. Like, if you can find a Marxist true soul by when they think everything went wrong, like the year they thought it went wrong. Hopefully nobody doesn't think things went wrong, at 1992. That's real late. But nonetheless, for most anti-revisionists, it's 1951, although the different kinds of anti-revisionists, and there are different, there's even Trotskyist tankies, by the way. And tanky is not a term I use most of the time because it's lost its historical meaning. It didn't just mean communist or Bolshevik. It meant people who sided with Khrushchev's Politburo to use military action in Hungary, where it was a mixed situation, and Prague, where I think the situation is a little clearer. And there were Trotskyists like Sam Marcy, who's kind of the founder of the Workers' World Party, the predecessor org of the PSL, who were Trotskyist Soviet defensists who also sided with the USSR and the Hungarian Revolution, which is why, like, this kind of easy narrative of Western versus non-Western Marxists is kind of a joke. Perry Anderson initially came up with that phraseology to defend Western academic theoretical Marxism in the 70s. And it's been inverted on its head by people like Dominique Lacerdo and by Midwestern Marx to condemn. But the category never made a lot of sense. All right. A lot of the Western Marxists had defected during Stalin's period to the Eastern Bloc, and it was only not the secret speech, not, World War II. A lot of them weren't there for the purges. They probably wouldn't survive them. The Yuzovchina, as the Marxist-Leninists like to call it, to blame it all on Yuzov and to excuse Beria and Stalin himself. But that, a lot of them were actually in the period when Stalin was alive, good Soviet citizens, particularly in East Germany. And it was what happened after World War II that pushed them towards the West, in the case of the Bloc and a few other people. Throwing people like Alain Badiou, who's a French Maoist, into that is just utterly incoherent. Blaming the capitalist rotor accusation on the Western left when it came out of China itself and was used in official party documents in the 60s is ludicrous, and yet I see people do it. And it actually belies an unwillingness to deal with the messiness of communist history. because we're afraid of anti-communists using it against us. So we take the anti-communist narrative and invert it, but it leads to complete misrecognition a lot of the time. But why would we do that? Why would we care? And this is where the class character of the current left in America actually does matter. Because what is this class character? It's a mixture of downwardly mobile middle class, what I would consider labor aristocrats. You can call them PMC if you like. Just remember, they're not really one class. They're a substrat of a bunch of them. And it's only part of them that are leftist in any real scenario. And leftist here is a directional metaphor. I'm going to get to that in a minute because it's important to remember that. There's always a left and right. One of the reasons why you can't get past left and right is because they're not fixed static categories, even the initial metaphor. They are directional categories, right? They're always relative to where you are. That's part of why they're so hard to get rid of as a thought framework. So when you go, I'm beyond left and right, it's like going, I'm beyond north and south, east and west. What do you mean? In some ways it's clear, in other ways it's completely not. All right. So it's a moving target. I have always said, and to illustrate this, I've always said I was on the right end of the ultra left, I am on the left end of the Marxist center or whatever, right? I reject certain left communist and even left opposition positions, like not working with business and our trade and our guild unions. Rejecting national liberation in all instances, which I don't do. Being against any collaboration with other socialist forces or workers' forces that aren't communist. Again, I think that's foolish. I'm not even for faction bans or homogeneous, unchanging programs, right? What makes me a little bit not align with the true Marxist center is I think the party has to be accountable to its membership up and down and recallable. I think a lot of the concessions made during the Russian Civil War made perfect sense for Civil War footing, but make no sense for building a party afterwards. These are things we have to kind of work out. Right. I also, despite being very aggressive with even other communists, and I am very personally sectarian, I do not support kicking most of them out of the movement. There are lines. Right. Strong class collaborationism is a line. That's a line. Particularly in the developed world. That's a line for me. You do that, you're not a socialist anymore. Like, and that, again, like a lot of social democrats, even some Marxist Leninists would reject me for that, right? I don't know, like I've said before, I don't know why we talk about comprador bourgeoisie in the imperial core. Like, what the fuck does that mean? How is there a bourgeoisie that's betraying you to empire in the empire? I don't think about mass lines and popular fronts with peasants because, frankly, there aren't any in our country. I wouldn't oppose them in other countries. In fact, I think maybe Marxists have been too strict at how they've handled and dealt with revolutionary peasants. Missing that Marx is pretty clear that the peasantry has both a revolutionary and a conservative tendency, and it's going to be pulled in different directions. I mean, frankly, so does the working class, right? That's why the whole concept of tailism became a thing. Like, our point wasn't just to flatter the working class, to say that whatever you already are is good, because it's frankly not. It was to admit that the working class, in so much that they could reproduce society, had an ability, if they ran society, to move everyone into them, thus undoing the need for a class society in the first place. That's the theory. You either accept it or you don't. If it's wrong, it's wrong, right? We haven't ever really gotten there. We don't know. I mean, even the actually existing socialist countries have never claimed to meet that criterion when they held it as valid. They're always claiming that they need to develop more productive forces. I don't know what productive forces you might need. It seems like as capital continues to exist, productive forces needs are going to continue to go up. And that's like a constantly increasing, frankly, waste of resources at some level or another. But I get why you can't ignore it. Which is why, like, for a while, I found stuff like communization and whatnot attractive. I ultimately rejected that because it rejected the working class as an actor, and also because I couldn't figure out how they thought communism worked. Like, class abolition as total leveling seemed to be kind of okay with some of them. And, yeah, no. And by total leveling, I don't mean like everyone's equal. I mean everyone's equal because we've gotten rid of all surplus altogether. So yeah, that's my rant. I mean, these are hard truths we have to deal with, but we have to look at the class nature of why that happened. So I'm ranting, so my recursive patterns are probably even worse tonight than normal. But let's look at what I said. So it was bracket out all the stuff that I said about Knipper policies. Let's go back to what happened with the left. Why did it end up in a weird situation with trade unions? Trade unions collaboration with the federal government in the 1950s, particularly during the Red Scare. I mean, it is the height of trade union power and Fordism is also during the height of the Red Scare. All right. Most people don't put that together, but it needs to be put together. That's because I'm calm right now, Pierre. I've been ranting for a while. When I get really mad, I'm going to threaten one of you to a duel. And it's going to seem like a joke, but it's not. And that is totally asocial and bad. We don't need to go there, right? It's like one of my worst toxic masculine habits. But nonetheless, for a second, I read that as Peter Kennard, and I was like, "Are you playing a joke on me, Pierre?" All right. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So, I'm going to call you all subcultural weirdos because you are. Yeah, egalitarian does require violence and honor, and politics, even egalitarian politics, requires antagonism. A socialist world will be a lot more peaceful, but it is not interpersonally without conflict. God damn it! Like, and in fact, good fighting is a way not to have to like destroy your enemies. Like a good sparring match or a duel is a way to get the violence out without it becoming zero sum, which is between equals. You don't really want it to be zero sum because one of you has to die. Like, pretty much how that goes. Y'all need to go to BDSM come. Well, I mean, never mind. I'm not gonna go there. So I think this is something we have to sit with and absorb. All right. The unions also had an issue that a lot of the workers were sending their kids to college. Off of the GI Bill. It's actually very interesting. I was looking at college ratios and rates. And also, AI is really stupid. Don't put this in the AI because I asked, like, what was the college, what was the rate of the population in college in 1955? And it told me 39 point something percent. And I was like, there's no way that was true. It was something like 8% and then went down to like 6% in the early 60s. But it was increasing from the early 60s forward because a lot of workers wanted their kids to go into management, or at least be able to go into management. As that happened, cartelling started happening throughout the labor market. So jobs that you used to be able to do with a fucking middle school education ended up requiring higher and higher levels of degrees. So from what I can tell right now, yeah, and Boskar, it's hard to figure out these stats. I actually went through a bunch of them the other day. It looks like we have 39, like 39-ish% of the population has attended. No, 39. Let me look at it. I'm quoting stuff off the top of my head. I really shouldn't. Percentage of U.S. population as college graduate that are college educated. We're going to ignore the AI overview on Google, and we're going to go to this Forbes article, and I'm going to share it with you so you can see what I'm looking at. I hope you guys appreciate that that I really try to show you my sources as best as I can, even when we're doing this live streaming shit and I don't have it all out in front of me. Let me look at it here. All right, so this is from Forbes. I'm going to look at the date because, fucking internet doesn't always give you the most up-to-date stuff like that. Survey everyone says about the popularity of socialism from 2019 has been redone, and no one ever cites the 2022 one because it's different. All right, percentage of adults with a college degree is higher, finds new Limiter report. All right. A Limiter funds working age adults who are in college degrees or post-secondary credentials climbed to 54% in 2022. That's not BAs. That includes associate's degrees, which is at its highest level. Now, it is actually declining in the number of young students going to school. That's also something, and it varies wildly by region. Also very true. Extremely true, actually. I mean, some states don't even have that much. Like, if you're in Wyoming, which doesn't have a high population, but it has like one school. Like, there's like one university. But anyway, back to the thing here. Let's ask ourselves a few questions about this. Now, a lot of people want to pretend that this means that the PMC is all college educated people, and all college educated people have the same prospects of when that theory was created in the early 1970s, when really truly most people with a BA were going into some kind of profession or management. They were either going to be petite bourgeois, they're going to be kind of extreme labor aristocrats. That was a real expectation in the late 60s, early 70s. And even though they were focusing on the university, because university kids had a lot of leisure time and there were a lot more of them, all right, because the numbers, starting in the 60s, college enrollment starts to spiral, and it's encouraged by government policy because they're using it to fight the Cold War. Louis Manan's book. Louis is not a Marxist. He's an Americanist, actually, not like an Americanist politically. I think he's just like a kind of generic Gen X left liberal, really like the American pragmatist. Anyway, but he points out how much investment went into the universities during the Cold War. It actually kind of created the whole environment that is left today between the baby boomers explosion and trying to figure out what you needed to do with them so that you wouldn't have that much of the population entering a declining factory workforce. If the Marshall Plan started to wrap up, you needed to put them somewhere, and that was school, right? But also you wanted to compete with the Soviets, and the Soviets had an excellent education system. I mean, you got to give the Soviets that. They really did. I mean, the Maoist, the PRC had a very diverse and broad education system that really brought a lot of peasants out of like total abject, let's say, deracination. It's not even poverty. But the Soviet education system was excellent. It was, and the Chinese education system took a while to catch up, and there's still like the Wild East attitude until Xi kind of cleaned that up a little bit in 2018, 2019. I mean, when I was an international educational mercenary, aka expat teacher, everyone wanted jobs in China because it was like high pay, minimal oversight, even with all the capital controls. Like it was, it's kind of wild. But nonetheless, that's been reined in to some degree now, and not like xenophobically faux. That's overstated. I still know people in China, so this happened. So you push more and more people into university degrees. But one of the things I have pointed out since the 1970s, since the achievement of universal secondary education, all right, most countries consider secondary education to stop around 9th or 10th grade. Okay. Like in Mexico, you graduate high school and what we would call middle school. In certain European countries, it's higher. The diploma programs are only for people going to college for studies. This is very rote and stigmatized system in a lot of places. But if you've ever wondered, like if you've ever been exposed to the International Baccalaureate program and wondered why is the middle years program from like 5th grade to like 10th grade, it's because of that. Because it ends with the end of secondary school in most countries outside of Europe and the United States. The American model and the achievement of universal secondary school is a relatively recent phenomenon. In 1955, most Americans did not have a high school diploma. They didn't need it, for one thing, but they didn't have it. Today, 90% of Americans have a high school diploma. Now, I'm with Freddie DeBoer on one key issue. I don't want to make the entire population more book smart. I want to valorize people for what they can do, which is all kinds of stuff, but it isn't all academic. I want relative de-skilling, and I also mean that for academics. Academics are way too specialized now. And this is a complexity problem. Joseph Tainer talks about it, but like literally, academics themselves often cannot conceptualize the broader world because they spent so much time on one key issue, whenever they study. And they outsource thinking about other things to other people. Well, you can see that's a problem when it comes to normative thinking. Right? So, one of the things we want to do is be like, when everyone needs a fucking degree, like, I was always like, I'm not against free college, and I would definitely do something about all the student fucking debt. But isn't it weird that we think we just need to put people in school longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer? It's weird to me. I understand why capitalists do it. It artificially decreases the unemployment rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? The reason why hyper-specialization is a problem, though, is it often also comes with underdeveloping social skills. So you don't know how to share your knowledge. And academics, by and large, because of their institutional capture framework, are encouraged to not develop those skills. So you're very right. There is way too much for any one person to know. I always say that, like, Marxism requires more than Marx himself could do, because you have to analyze what we are about. Like, is equalization of society and the ruthless critique of all that exists. That requires that you know something about all that exists, which no one person can do. Nobody. Like, I'm an academic generalist. We are rare. Most academic journalists today are journalists. Gross. All right. But that's usually the best we have. Because to be a decent journalist, you do have to know little bits about everything, but often not enough to even contextualize what you're fucking reporting on. Like, Vincent Bevins, and I have a lot of critiques of his new book, which I got so that people will shut up about me talking shit. This will be marked up soon. No, I'm not doing a whole show on it. But he actually has a good observations about the media in here. I don't agree with everything. I think verticalism and horizontalism misses a lot of the point. Like arguing about what structure you're going to move laterally or hard when you need both. The horizontal that's unaccountable to the vertical is pretty fucking useless. And the vertical without the horizontal has no way to concretize around a singular movement, right? Yeah, journalists often are the only people who are encouraged to sound smart. And look, what I want people to know is I know I'm an arrogant asshole. And I know a lot of stuff, but I also don't know a whole lot of stuff. Like, I don't know a ton. I'm good at looking stuff up. And I'm good at knowing how to read through other people's biases and bullshit. Although it's hard to teach. Like when people ask me, what sources should I trust? And I'm like, you should trust no sources, man. You compare sources against themselves and you try to build up enough of a knowledge base that over time you can actually make these calls on your own accord, right? But hardly anybody can do that in everything. Like there's whole I don't do that in medicine. You don't see me pontificating about what good medicine practices are. Well, my problem, Robert, you bring this up. My problem is not that even that Leninism is bad. Look, I don't even lose that much sleep about Marxists and Leninists. They come at me all the time. I actually don't tend to come at them because I think their politics is from a previous epoch. It's like someone claiming to be a Platonist. Not really. You don't live in that context. You could claim to be from that tradition in some way, and I've come through the scholastic tradition, and I know that it goes back to the academy and then through the medieval scholastics, and it is preserved in certain dialectical thinkers, like in German idealism or analytic Marxism or whatever you want to pick, right? But that politics, that what it meant to be a Platonist in 5th century Athens, you're not part of that cult. You're not part of that academy. You don't have those esoteric secrets, etc. Similarly with Leninism, there's the Soviet Union. I'm a mild Soviet defensist, but it did atrocities and it fucked up a lot. I don't know why we wouldn't expect it to. I can't think of a society that doesn't, right? And we should call it out, this idea that we're either pro-Soviet or anti-Soviet, particularly after 1992. I kind of understood it when it was a besieged, socialist area, and that's why I can't forgive the Sino-Soviet split, even though I understand what prompted the Sino-Soviet split. Right? But we are not those people. We do not live in those material conditions. Even the strategies developed don't really apply to us. And I mean, I don't mean Americans or people watching this show. I mean everybody. It is part of our tradition, and Marxists and anarchists who want to remove it from our tradition are doing the no true Scotsman fallacy. They want to remove the ugly so we only have the beautiful, right? But a lot of the other people who want to go, well, the Soviet Union made some mistakes and the PRC made some mistakes, but we're never going to fucking talk about them, are also kind of just inverting that. If you cannot look at it and admit it and learn it, this is true for the bourgeois revolutions too. I know I have the controversial thought that not all the founding fathers were total shit. There's a reason why, and Ho Chi Minh, or even certain Maoist thoughts, there's particularly founding fathers that are fairly well venerated, and it isn't just Tom Paine. I mean, having a boner for Jefferson's a little weird because he's a particularly, I mean, you know, he's a particularly problematic and self-contradictory character. I mean, in some ways, he represents the side of liberalism that Dominic Lesotho is right about, and the side of liberalism that Jonathan Israel or even Chris Catrone is right about in the same person. But I would not like make that my ride or die political move at all. Like, you know, I mean, one of the realizations I had, it is absolutely really bad. Do I need to tell you the general conditions of humanity? Because it's mostly barbarism. But like I said, I would not be defending that or most of what Jefferson does because he's an odious person. But honestly, he could be an odious person who said right things. I think Stalin was a fairly odious person. He also said some things that were correct every now and then. I just don't see the point on like reviving Marxist Leninism like that because 1992 happened. It's not really a living tradition. You can, I guess, revive. I guess I kind of get people trying to revive the Dengist Chinese version because that is a living tradition, right? But even there, they're trying to like somehow both have their cake and eat it too in regards to the Sino-Soviet split and not talk about what it meant. All right. So you can't learn from it other than Khrushchev bad because he said bad things about Daddy Stalin. You know, it's like people wanting me to like, you know, who condemn Jefferson but want me to talk good things about fucking Beria. Why? Gross. We need to sing Laos style Leninism to Idaho. That's funny. Yeah. For those of you who are not communists and watching this, you're probably wondering what the fuck I'm ranting about. But I've been thinking about this, like, you know, what happened with the universities? This has been this long, circuitous circle that we're going back and forth here. Why did the left get addicted to college students as its political actors and political subjects? And there's a cynical way we can see it, but I don't think it started cynical. One, originally they were the children of the not just the working class in general. Like, I'm not one of these people who thinks that the only working class is the industrial working class, but they were the children of the industrial working class as well as elites. Right? They were both because of the GI Bill for a little while. And as the second half of the 20th century progressed, we started curtailing job access through educational achievements. So, like I said, you could be an actuary off of a high school diploma in the 50s. It takes a master's degree now. And the literacy requirements to graduate have dropped down. We haven't raised our graduation by universally improving education. We have improved it some since the 1950s, like across the board. Literacy has gone up, but to about an 8th grade level. And I think it's actually declines over time too. Right? It's not just that they had time to think about shit. I mean, it's interesting we say that, but like the workers' movement was for people who work longer hours than we do now and thought about shit. I mean, they weren't all Marx. I mean, you know, when Marx tells me that capital is written for the working, it has untranslated Latin and Greek in it. I'm like, dude, Marx, come on, man. Like, that's pretty out of touch. But there is a real way in which, like, the average worker might know about Herodotus or whatever. Like, you know, they weren't totally illiterates. In fact, I think one of the things we're learning about the past is the assumption of mass illiteracy, even in the medieval period, is overstated. So I'm going to get to that. There's a question. In the spirit of Tainter, is education our complex system? It isn't. Our system in general is over complex. Education accelerates that complexity through specialization, but some of that specialization is legitimately needed. Is there something else that education system is upon to the military industrial complex? Well, the education system is an adjunct of the administrative state. Explicitly. If you look at its funding, what is its major funding sources? It's an adjunct to capital, not in Europe, not in continental Europe, but in the UK and in the US. Even public schools have large endowments that own tons of land and are invested heavily in stock. So they're literal capitalists as institutions. They're an institutional capitalist. And I'm not just talking about like even the public schools are. All right. They are also highly dependent on administrative grants. That's why any academic probably is 3 degrees removed from the CIA. I know I'm 3 degrees removed from the CIA somehow. I'm not saying that as a brag or as I'm secretly a spook, because I'm not. I just know that like I'm 2 degrees removed from a program that I actually turned down that I know had intelligence funding as an undergrad, right? And if you go to like anybody in colleges, like Terence McKenna, any fucking weirdo in the 1950s, what you'll find is that they were quarreling with feds because they were quarreling with feds. All the schools were crawling with feds during the Cold War. So every weirdo from Terence McKenna to Hunter S. Thompson had some run-in that you read about with some federal agency or another. But that's been structuralized today. So there's so many people in the schools, they don't have any run-ins with feds for the most part. But the grant system ties all that into the federal government. Oh, yeah. James C. Scott, my favorite State Department anarchist. You know? We're not going to talk about how many anthropologists have State Department or Department of Defense ties, or even CIA ties, man. Even radical ones. So this is structuralized today. So you're dependent on federal grants that tie you indirectly often to DARPA, or the intelligence agencies or whatever. And today in the United States, most of your generalists aren't even, we always talk about primary scientific research coming out of universities. Well, a lot of that primary scientific coming out of universities is actually primary scientific first. It's actually started or piggybacking on or tied into DARPA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even a friend of mine who's a PhD in technical communication says that like some of the most lucrative jobs and tech comm that are hiring the most people are people doing nuclear deterrence communications. So even the humanities is full of that shit. I mean, it's the technical humanities, but yeah. Chris Knight wrote a book on Chomsky that talks about how Chomsky like tried to avoid direct funding with the military industrial complex, but indirectly he was still tied into it. Just like almost every major Ivy League and first tier school academic has some tie to somebody on the Epstein Express. It's including Chomsky had lunch with him to talk about investment once. Like it's just the way this shit goes. All right. Speaking of education, is public K teaching a decent gig? No. I'm in Wisconsin. Collective bargaining rights unlimited here. Yeah, although your unions are actually smarter in the industrial Midwest than some of the other places. But they do have limited collective bargaining rights. We have limited here. When I say no, it's a good. It's not a low paying job the way it is portrayed compared to the vast majority of jobs in the U.S. It's a low-paying job compared to anything that requires education. But that's not why most people don't do it. It's not the pay. It's the conditions. So would I encourage you to do it? I do it. I'm a weirdo. I fucking love it, but the conditions are not great. Not great at all. And there's a paradox in education. I mean, there's a paradox in most high school teachers sincerely want to help all their students, even if they're bad at it, even if they have unstated biases and class prejudices and are probably implicitly biased on racial grounds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Most of them really do want to help, but part of the function of the job is to sort people. And anyone who says that isn't the case is fundamentally lying to themselves. Most people in public education make it 5 years. We lose 50% of our workforce in the first 5 years. Bhaskar, as a former prison guard, you're not entirely wrong. Now, I teach in an online program now. I'm not going to talk much about my day job. That's a good way for me to lose both my gigs. But I teach in an online program that's run by the state. It's not a private school or one of those charter school scammy things. It's a public school online program. And I write curriculum for it, and I have a bunch of students under my care. Something like 250 or something like that. And that's what I do. I was a glorified prison guard at a public school for a long time. When I was in a private school, I was an actual teacher, but I taught the elites. I used to assuage my conscience by going and doing clinics with like ranchero kids or with poor Egyptian kids, teaching them gardening and English and basic math. But that was like for my conscience sake. That wasn't like my job. It was also getting good in the community, which was a good thing to do, by the way, because both those places were highly unstable. And being good with the community saved my ass multiple times. And it's weird being back in America because America is a highly, even for the capitalist world. And I'm not one of these people who thinks like Americans are uniquely shitty or anything. Like the hegemons are kind of dumb because they're hegemons. They don't have a lot of competition, so they get decadent. But I don't think like there's anything to the American character that's particularly awful, right? Other than what it means to be encased in and probably immiserated within a hegemon. But on this, I'll say American alienation and social decline is way worse than in a lot of way poorer, way more desperate countries. And I don't mean like a moral sense, like I don't give a shit about people's sexuality. Like I am also probably a weirdo by most standards. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, which I guess I sound very Gen X. You know, I don't sound, not that there's anything wrong with that. There really isn't anything wrong with it. But what I do mean is like people here are low social trust. I was reading about play and why play is declined and its low social trust, and a lot of the fear is imaginary. Now, a lot of it's based on, and this research ignored it. If you're a patron, I actually go through the research paper page by page. I can't put it on a public feed because it's probably copyrighted, and I don't want to get sued. But but that one of the reasons why children don't play just outside anymore is low social trust. The other thing that wasn't mentioned in the study is that there's fewer and fewer public places that we have anywhere for kids to go. I mean, including like retail and commercial spaces, like quasi public spaces, even. But yeah, no, you are. The rest of the world gets a lot more like the worst parts of America, and America gets a lot more like the worst parts of the rest of the world as I get older. This is the irony of this weird time period where like it's funny because I get accused of being pro like unipolar, and I'm like, no, I don't. I don't. If anything, I would believe in no poles, but I'd rather have multiple than one. I just think we have to figure out how you parse all that, right? What that actually means, how you live in that world. It can't just be that, oh, there's multiple powers now, everything's great. Like, because different powers counterbalance each other. They can counterbalance each other in all kinds of fucked up ways. I mean, people get really mad when I point out that World War I happened in a multipolar world. Nonetheless, that's not inevitable. All right, that's not what I'm saying. My point is that a lot of the anti-Americanism comes at a time where a lot of places are a lot more like the United States, and that's weird. Like, that's a weird observation, and I say this because a lot of the most rabid anti-American people I meet are not actually even from. I mean, they haven't even really left the country ever, and admittedly, like poor people can't, working class people can't, unless you get a job like I did. I traveled the world because someone else paid for it. I didn't fucking pay for it. I couldn't move out of my state for 10 years because I didn't have the money to do it. Yeah, it does fit into my talk with the Regrettable Century crew about third campism versus no campism. What camp would I support? There's not a global workers movement for me to like be like down on right now. That would require formal international institutions in which it could exist in, and we barely have that with business unions. You know? Like right now, the only global international institution seems to be the UN and the World Bank. I mean, they're basically neoliberal and they're dying. As a friend of the show and person even more cynical than me, Mean Gene Badgelon said, we've gone from socialism in one country versus permanent revolution to capitalism in one country versus permanent counter-revolution. AKA people trying to hold on to neoliberalism after it's gone, it's not able to restore profits anymore. The permanent counter-revolution, the quote globalist unquote, and people trying to have a autarkic capitalist economy when they don't even have all the minerals, even in the biggest states in the world, to do it. Capitalism in one country. I mean, I'm not one of these big proponents of like the final crisis because Marxists predict that every 3 days. Not all of them. A lot of people have given up on that, but a lot. But let's be real for a minute and just be honest with ourselves and say, like, we're stuck between two bad capital formations, neither one of which seem to be able to deal with the fundamental crises at hand. And it doesn't mean that the economy is collapsing. That's the weird thing. They aren't, particularly for the bourgeois. In fact, as I was telling someone today, all these monetary schemes, some of them could be progressive. I'm not against like MMT fixes or whatever, but under current conditions and current control, you drop interest rates to nothing, People with capital buy up everything. You raise interest rates really high, people with capital buy it in cash and then close other people out of the market. What do both of them favor? People who already have primitive accumulated capital. There is no quick fix to any of this. You know, I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, we can't use money. No, we need a mediator. I don't think my form of socialism is market socialism ultimately, but as a transitionary form, I'm not against it. It could be a way to like get new internationals together through joint cooperation to weaken any one nation, being able to like throw that at people like the US currently does. I mean, one of the most progressive things, Keynes, who I otherwise think it was not nearly as progressive as he's painted. I mean, he kind of invented the university endowment, by the way we see it today. That was one of his major jobs, was making money for universities and turning them into landlords. So, you know, I'm no lover of Keynes. I want people to know that. If you want to get a good view of my view on Keynes, what is it? Last Year's Man? I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's a book. Last Year's Man is a book on Joe Biden. Book on Keynes. Marxist Critique of Keynes book. Well, I guess there's Keynes and Progress and the Crisis of Keynesian Economics and Keynes and Marx by Paul Maddock, but I don't mean the books. It's a biography of Keynes. But basically, what Keynes does is what fascism tried to do, which was to mitigate the crisis of the early stage of commodity money and capital, when states were relatively equal between each other and thus fighting all the fucking time. Oh yeah, I love that Wittgenstein ruining Keynes's honeymoon thing. And I mean, I don't care about Keynes's sexuality. He's a mixed figure. My point on Keynes, though, is one thing that he had a very good idea about is create. Now, this would have helped the British Empire. It wasn't selfish or even progressive in a clear, non-motivated way. But if the world had a world interchangeable currency that was not controlled by one nation, it would create conditions for world mediation and for mitigating conflict and wars that are fought abound and through foreign exchange reserves. All right. So I want to give Keynes credit for something. That's actually a pretty big idea. Marx did not have any such conception in his head because he didn't live in a time period where states were powerful enough relative to each other than the British to pull that stunt, and the British can only pull it on periphery areas. And it's actually interesting in MMT studies themselves. If you read like Randall Ray, a lot of the examples are from British colonial ex-empires within the United States and Canada, or they're within explicit British people proletarianizing and bourgeoisifying Africa through token exchange. You know, so just know that no one else could do it. So a global currency would mitigate against that, but that's not communism or even socialism. It's not even not capitalism. It would just create a grounds for internationalism, of which workers' movements, if they had their own separate internationals, could actually try to do something with. Whereas right now, what would workers see? You want workers to see the fucking UN or international law, aka treaties that the nations agree to? Come on. So yeah, I mean that would be good. Bancor would be good, but the other, Keynesianism, however, is still a bourgeois ideology. MMT is, frankly, a descendant of the German historical school, Knapp, and even the Lassalleans. That's its origins. I don't love that. mixing with Keynesianism and leading to neo-chartalism. Because early chartalism in the German historical school still accepted barter as the formation of exchange. Like everybody did, because that's what Adam Smith thought. Barter is the formation of exchange between outgroups. And I think this gets missed. And a lot of people going, barter's not the foundation. No, it is between outgroups. It's not within a tribal band or a community or a village. They didn't barter. It's not what happens between individuals, because human individuals never exist that atomized in nature. We don't survive well atomized. We're not evolutionarily adapted for it. We're not very strong. We don't have good claws. Our teeth kind of suck. What we have is social intelligence. And our social intelligence has developed to a point that we carry the intellectual labor of prior humans in our language. Imperfectly. Plato's right in like saying that writing's going to hurt memory. It does. It does. But language enables us to not have to relearn all of human development that isn't instinctual. And it does that because it is social. It valorizes dead intellectual labor. Gives us an advantage. So anyone who tries to atomize you, they are making you weaker. They are making you psychologically more fragile. They are making you lonely. They are making you less fun. They are making you easily victimized. And by the way, we're not social because we love fucking victims. All right? I don't care about, people always talk about Varn wants a just world. I don't give a shit about justice. All right? Most controversial thing I say, I don't care about justice. There is no justice for the stuff that happened in the past. There is no way to undo it. There is no way to remediate it. The barbarism of the past has happened. You don't unkill someone. You don't unrape them. You don't unburn down their country. I am for making sure that through power egalitarianism, I'm only concerned about power egalitarianism, guys. All right? I'm not concerned about other forms of egalitarianism. I don't think humans are all the same, so we can't all be equal in a mathematical sense. I think we can all have equal power, and through that sociality that brings about, we are all stronger. And I do think everyone has things they can contribute in a real way. So I am interested in us living together on this earth. I am interested in getting rid of class society and artificial social barriers to human flourishing and human interconnectedness. I do not care about abstract notions of justice. Yes, we have to use that language because that's a language people understand intuitively. But that intuition also makes it vague. Do we mean fairness, or do we mean revenge, or do we mean due process of law? And why do I give a shit about due process of law? Who set up the law? Wasn't me. And I'm not telling you, if you believe in social justice or you believe in justice, you have to give that off. I'm telling you, I don't care about that. I care about the lives and autonomy of actual people regardless of their nationality and regardless of what happens to them. And I am willing to expropriate the expropriators to do that. I'm willing to go at the bourgeoisie so that the bourgeoisie can't do this to us anymore. But once that's done, I don't have any problem with the children. I don't have any problem with anyone who throws their lot in with us. I don't have any problem with anyone's origins. I'm not about justice in that sense. I don't think that's possible even. But if people are hoarding shit from us, yeah, that's a different deal. Look, I'm not even a big proponent of the T word. All right. I don't think it's not because I'm some kind of moralist. I think it exhausts society when you overuse it. And for everyone who's talking about this, you're absolutely right. There's a missing center in all this, right? There's a big missing center. And it's in that failure to deal with the fact that most of us came from the students because they had leisure time and they had the time to think, but they also had the extra time to contribute. That because it's not because that it's just labor, it's also other social responsibilities. And a lot of the rest of the world now acts like students, even when they aren't, because those social responsibilities have dissolved over time in a lot of ways. Like incel men who can just stay home and play video games, that wasn't possible without someone else getting that surplus done. So what do you do to build these institutions? One, you need to have the ability to recall leaders. Leaders need to be provisional and truly provisional. Two, you need to make sure that you don't always encourage zero-sum fighting and make every disagreement something that people have to fight to the death over, which the left has actually more than the Ancien regimes, more than liberals, more than conservatives. The left has a hard time accepting that people could share an orientation, agree on a general program, and disagree on a whole lot of shit. The working class is not unified. It does not speak in one voice. I got a rant coming up about that. Neither does the communist left, etc., etc., etc. This is why, like, you've never seen me promote cancel culture. I will call people names. I've been accused of demonizing people. I will taunt people to fucking back. All right? But I don't want them kicked out of the movement. I don't. I want to beat them in the movement. I want to beat them politically. As an ally wants to be allies he disagrees with, or she disagrees with, or they disagree with. The problem with that, Pierre, is not that you're wrong, but it has different wounds and different chains. And that developing, the differences in those chains and wounds have developed over time in ways that I don't think Marx and Engels really envisioned could get as unequal within the class. Although it's implied in early Marx. Marx just talks about the labor's alienation from labor, not just from the products of its labor, but from laborers because they have to compete for relative social advantage. That's in early Marx. It's kind of not in late Marx, interestingly, as much. And that over time has become a good way of social control. Intra-class competition is a good means of social control because it alienates you. But, if someone comes from another class, I was telling someone the other day, I was mocking someone for their PMC background because they're one of these people who constantly talks about the PMC and the good working class and how you can't trust anyone from an academic background. This person's a professor, and most of the people who talk this way are. Right? Like, PMC on PMC violence is like a common thing because it's a shock of self-recognition that your strata, and it's a strata, I'm going to be clear on that. And there's others, the lumpen are a strata, they're a social category. They're not a class. In fact, it's a process in my mind. Right? In your strata, you know it. You see its flaws. Most working class people know the pathologies of working class people really well because they fucking lived it. And when they get out, they have survivor's bias and often turn on the class that they come from. And those who don't can romanticize it in hindsight and nostalgify it and their own previous class position. One of the interesting thing about the left, like, remember, directional metaphors, always moving targets, right? But one of the interesting things about the left, at least right now, is the downwardly mobile make more of it than upwardly mobile workers. Upwardly mobile workers are alienated by it because of all the fucking victim talk. And you know who knows that? I haven't been a worker, and at least, I am part of the working class, but I have not been a blue-collar, non-privileged, labor aristocratic worker in a long time. But I remember what that lumpenized life was like as a child. Higher levels of abuse, higher levels of addiction, lower levels of relational stability of any sort. The increasing gray area between the working poor proletariat and the lumpen is all over the place. And social pathologies that we associate with lumpenness are actually, over the 20th century, spread up the class ladder. More social instability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying this because I think, monogamy is a good, or that respectability politics was great. I'm just saying that there was a stable world of the bourgeois world that existed, and that stability of the bourgeois family was encouraged, forced upon, bequeathed, take your pick, upon a lot of working class people. And it's been taken away, and it was never all that great, but without it, a lot of people have what exactly, since these other social institutions are also crime. And yeah, so when we talk about the lumpen versus the worker, there's a whole lot of gray area there. I mean, I think I've talked about this a lot in my own origin story, right? But my father was in and out of being a con man and being a salesman, and he never owned his own business, never owned his own capital. There's always a wage laborer or a commission laborer. My stepfather was a mechanic, downwardly mobile mechanic. He came from failed, professional class people. My mom was a waitress who became a nurse in her late 30s. Two of my brothers are high school dropouts, and two of us are highly educated. One of us has a PhD, not me. The other does not, but my sister is an artist who lives out of a van. My stepsister. I don't have a biological sister. I don't ever talk about this personal stuff because I don't want people looking up my family, and you can't find it from my last name. You can figure out who my dad was. But Yeah. It's crazy how one good salary can change in a family. Family, it's also crazy how we underestimate wealth. But yeah, I grew up in that background. Nothing about that background appealed to me as a child. It wasn't because I was a snob. I mean, I am kind of a snob, but it wasn't because of that. It was because, like, most of the men in my family have died before 60. In my father's generation, almost all the men died before, none of them made it to 70. Now, my grandfather, who was a brick maker, and I'm not making that shit up, like, a brick maker who was the son of a sharecropper who killed himself. He supported his sister and his mom and got married at 18 during the Great Depression. That was my granddad. And had an 8th grade education, used to read to me all the time. That's why I get so fucking mad at people who pretend that working class people are illiterate. My granddad, who was not formally educated, really insisted that I always have books and could read. Right? My other granddad was a terrible person and was a manager. Surprise, surprise. I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to slander him. I'm close to some of my mom's family, but nonetheless. And I grew up because of stuff in the 20th century. A lot of my grandmother's people who did way back come from. Well, we'll talk about that. I think that's a difference in time period, Bucket. I think it's a different. Ironically, the experience of schooling for a lot of working class people turned them off to literacy. Are sharecroppers and small farmers who rent close to peasants? I think in the American context, sharecroppers are the closest thing we had to peasants. Agrarian workers who rent are a little different because they do earn wages and they pay absolute rents, where sharecroppers didn't. And so they weren't bonded to their land, but since they paid percentiles, they also really didn't have a way to get out. So yeah. But yeah, so in the South, like, I had a very rear view of regional politics. Like, I've never been sympathetic to neo-Confederates, but I've always hated the Northeast. Yes, Pierre, this is dead true. I'm going to put this on the screen. Being literate now is like a costume you can wear. It's almost like it's not an antiquated skill. I don't think it is, but it is sold to people like that. And it's a way that people show distinction. And look, I do it. I know I use literacy to show distinction. I'm completely aware. All right. It's not a good thing. It's a bad habit. It sucks. Oh no, David, I didn't interpret you as saying that. If you'd have said the latter, I would have got really mad. Not just slightly push back on you. You just reminded me of all the people who told me. Are there the people who valorize the fact that literacy is not necessary for the working class anymore? Because I'm like, well, if literacy is not necessary, it really does make you depend on gatekeepers on how you get information, even in the media. Like, books are relatively easy to procure. Media access is not. And so a lot of people from, I mean, look, you'll notice that most of Lester's podcasts have their bookshelves in the back. I want you to notice, however, that my bookshelves Yes, there are intellectual books in that shelf, but those back there and those on the back row are role-playing games. So make of that what you will. I don't hide my hobbies. So yeah. But it's something to think about. Like I remember that class. I hated that when I started. Yeah, I'm a gamer, and I play tabletop games. I hate computer games for the most part. I feel like there's negative effects on my executive function just from like arguing with people on Facebook, much less playing video games. I'm not here to judge video games. I think people should get their leisure wherever they fucking want to get it. Nonetheless. Okay. Focus. Even this, by the way, taxes my executive function. So you guys might not notice. I used to try to script what I said on those rants and whatnot. And I read like a teleprompter, like the most cogent. I mean, I already stop and start and say all the time anyway, but like real bad, like totally bad. And when I wrote it out, it was worse. I said, like, there's a couple of videos that were taken down on Zero where, like, on the Frankfurt School and my problems with the Frankfurt School and their actual history and blah, 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 where I, like, read a script and, oh my God, it was the most mechanical thing I've ever done. I don't lecture that way. When I was a college professor, my way of, like, teaching classes just to, like, read the material, make sure I have some bullet point notes and just to go. And to always stop at a regular basis and allow questions. And unfortunately, today I have to stop every 5 to 10 minutes so people can process what they're saying because against executive function issues that everybody has. Not judging anyone for it. Just everyone's got it now. Thank you, fucking technology. So I stop a lot when I speak, and I actually speak sarcastically when teaching someone on purpose. But yeah, verbal communication with people is noticeably difficult. Written communication with people is noticeably difficult. I know a lot of people seem to not read what I say. Like, it's weird. Like, they seem literate, they know what the words mean, but it's hard. And people have asked me, like, when are you going to do TikTok shorts, whatever? And I'm like, I've tried to do it on Instagram, and I just fucking can't. I cannot. I am too long-winded. Oh no, you compared me to Sam Cedar. Well, Sam Cedar is a millionaire comedian, and I'm a high school teacher, so you know. Not there, yeah. I'm not gonna ban you. I don't ban people. Well, okay, that's not true. I totally ban people. I think I've only banned though like 10 people from this ever. Now, when I was on Twitter, I think I banned 1,000 people. Then I just decided to leave Twitter. There's a Varnblog Twitter account out there so that when people tell me something stupid happened on Twitter, I can like pop in and look and then leave. But that's it. That's all I use it for. There's actually studies on this, Mr. Byte, about inferences declining in the last 30 years. that people don't have the requisite store of knowledge to understand all the things they're supposed to infer, and they don't interact with people or play enough as children for that to happen. Fuck, I did it again. It's a real issue. Like, you know, if you have kids, please just let them play for a few hours a day, unsupervised, and not on a fucking screen. I know you probably don't have the space. You need a backyard. Everything's been privatized. It's not your fault. But if you can do it, do it. One of the things I try to do as a dude in a world full of very sketchy, low trust society is I try to be an allo parent to like friends of mine and women in my life and stuff's kids. I don't just mean like partners or lovers or whatever. I mean like I try to like volunteer to watch kids, and if people are worried about your kid being with a dude, I do it with like with my partner. So, you know, like I have children around a lot, believe it or not. I think as a leftist, it's something we should do because we can bitch about social reproduction all day long. But this isn't me being like prefigurative. This is something you can do now. Like, you want women to organize, you gotta help them take care of their kids. And that's not just an investment in your friends having some social time, although that's really important. It's an investment in the fucking future. I'm not saying people need to have tons of kids. In fact, I kind of glad we're out of that for a while. But I am saying that kids that are in your life, you shouldn't try to force yourself on as a mentor or anything like that. But you need to always remember you could help their parents, help their kids, create a space for them that's safe. You can do that. So if anyone gives you the chance, do it. I teach a lot of broken kids, good kids that are just fucking collapse real easy. And I do worry, I'm going to say something controversial. I do worry about the leftist use of trauma exacerbating the effects of trauma on younger people. Telling everyone that they're triggered all the time. I get mad, for example, when we make jokes about school shootings. Not that people make jokes about what happens in school shootings. That's actually pretty rare. But they make jokes about the prevalence of school shooting because they're not actually prevalent. One is too many, right? But 350, most of which are non-lethal, most of which are not random or mass, in a country of 350 million is not really meaning that most kids really have to live with. And we traumatize them with those drills all the time. Yeah. And yeah, we live in a country with more guns than people we've had more guns than people in the United States since the 60s. Right? Like, it's crazy. I used to be a gun owner. I used to carry most of the time. I gave that up. For a variety of reasons. One of which, statistically, the most likely person to die by that gun is me. But I mean, statistically, the most likely thing to happen with that gun is nothing, right? But those drills, they may have affected something like right after Columbine, or when the first wave of random mass shootings, let's put that in, happened. But as I've said many times, we've done them for 20 years. Everybody knows what they are now. We haven't really changed them. I don't know, what they think. And when I go into a public school classroom, the first day, they give me a bucket with some toilet paper, a few bottles of water, in case we're stuck in the classroom. Seriously. A bucket. Not even a first aid kit. A bucket. I don't have a first aid kit. I can't bureaucratically administer that, nor does my school have a nurse. Or didn't when I was an in-person teacher. Yeah, I bought tons of supplies for the kids. Yeah, bulletproof backboards and stuff like that. Yeah. In Utah, I say this all the time because it stuns me, man. It stuns me about this country. A kitty litter in schools for cleaning up vomit and blood. But it stuns me about this country. I can't break up a fight legally, and I'm not saying that's bad, because when I had to break up a fight legal in Georgia, I occasionally hurt kids to stop them from hurting each other. Like I never assaulted them or anything, but I would restrain them and they would rip themselves out, but sometimes also their shoulder. And I was indemnified for that. That's not good. Right. But in Utah, man, today, I can't break up a fight, but I can concealed carry on campus. Legally, totally legally. Has been legal. It wasn't a change after the last round of mass shootings. It's been legal for over a decade. But we run people through these scenarios all the time, and we tell them it's going to happen all the time, and it never does for most people, but they see it on the news. It messes with people. I am not saying people don't need to be prepared. I don't know what this prepares them for other than to be afraid. And fear, to quote Frank Herbert, is the mind killer. Fear is the solidarity killer. Fear makes you conservative. Fear fucks you up. I refuse to live in fear. Live in anger. Yeah, that's misplaced about what they're dealing with. I mean, I agree with you though. The way both liberals and conservatives handled the pandemic blew my fucking mind. Blew my mind. It was like a way to do everything wrong. You want people to trust institutions, you start out about lying about masks. And I don't mean lying about having to use them, about lying about them not being affected, then pivoting, then saying, oh, we only said that because we didn't have enough, but then not making enough for another 6 more months. Giving strong advice before we knew what the actual parameter was, then ducking down and it wasn't just the US. I was flabbergasted. Socialist countries fuck that shit up. Pierre, I think a lot of people here don't understand what fear is. And so they're like, I'm not going to live in fear. Actually, I am. I'm afraid of the government. I'm afraid of what this mask is going to do to me. Like, it's actually, it's not that they're not living in fear. They're changing what they're afraid about. Oh yeah, no. Like, look, I like millennials, my generation, right? Well, I guess my generation. I don't know what the fuck generation I am. From where I talk about the millennial left, I do that out of convenience, because it is a clear demarcator between us and like the 80s, 90s Gen X left. Thank you guys. That the Gen X left is like way too cynical, doesn't trust anything. The millennial left, and doesn't for the most part exist now because of it. The millennial left, I don't know what to attribute this to. Maybe it's post 9/11 shit. And I think that, when I speak about the millennial left, I want people to know I only apply this to the English speaking world. I only apply this to the English speaking world. And it's because the baby boomers is a class category in a way because of its wealth association, and all the other generations, which are really marketing categories. They're socially constructed marketing categories, and they do tell you stuff. That's not, I'm not using it to dismiss it. I hate when people use the origins of something to dismiss it, but they're not as explanatory as baby boomers are. Baby boomers in the United States came into being when the wealth of the United States relative to the rest of the world, not its absolute wealth, but its wealth relative to the rest of the world, was massive. 48%, according to George Kennan, of the world's wealth that survived World War II was in North America, mostly in the US. The reason why I talk about the millennial left is that, in a very literal sense, they are those people's children, both ideologically and literally. And I do think, when I also refer to the millennial left, I agree with Boskor. It's the people who were on the left between 9/11 and 2 years ago. The Zoomer left is not really just Zoomers either, right? And one of the things I was going to get to about the focus on students is that when you'd fail domestically, and one of the things about the domestic time period is, I used to complain, no one in that time period on the left was realistically talking about the international situation. Like, how many years have people stopped talking about the Iraq and Afghan wars when they were still fucking going on? Then today's left, actually kind of like the Gen X left, in light of an utter failure of the prior left to achieve its goals, turn to foreign policy where it has the least effect and the most passion. But it also, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing all the time, but it also is about moral objects, people as objects who are solely good or bad, rendered victims by history. Now, because they are people that I want to be in solidarity with, I don't want them to be crushed under the wheels of historical progressive development or whatever the fuck. All right? But I'm not going to pretend that even if we got divestment in the case of Palestine, that I really am going to be a decisive figure in stopping that massacre unless I was on the ground with guns. And frankly, that would be a suicide mission. However, Bhaskar is right. You cannot separate these out in either direction. In either direction. And if anyone bears the blame for these kids focusing on geopolitical issues, it's because we didn't focus on them at all for the last 10 years. You cannot separate these two things out. And the way a lot of leftists cover international politics when they're not about war, it's like find whatever pinkish government you want to support or reddish government you want to support and just cheerlead them to death without talking about them in a realistic manner, positively or negatively. All right, we can make fun of like Marxist-Leninists doing this about Iran or whatever, ignoring problems in China, ignoring actual economic data even. But we can also point out that SOCDEMs do it too with Norway, Sweden, AMLO, whatever the flavor of the week in Latin America was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? It's a want for a politics for you to connect to, but you don't actually have to belong to or have skin in your game. Now, on geopolitical war shit, you have skin in the game indirectly. You do. So someone asked me, is there any genuine left beyond campus protests yet? I've seen INT guys starting a revolutionary communist party. We've had the workers' opinions. Let's be quite frank. There are lots of Gen Z people who grew up LARPing anarchist and Marxist politics on Tumblr. Like literally, they started doing it on Tumblr and Reddit like at 13 and 14 years old. They often were multiple ideologies on those things, right? And that has evolved into people who've adopted the aesthetics of political movements and the stances of political movements and the language of political movements. But despite being democratic centralist, they don't join a party. They watch a stream. Now, I'm not sure joining a party would be better for them, but from their own ideology, you'd think they would, but they don't. The search for a political subject elsewhere has been the American current since like 1918, 1921, right? It comes in circles, yes. Yeah. So what we see since the 1920s is that there's a displacement to somewhere else after a political local movement fails. Once people burn out on caring about that, which takes about 5 to 10 years, they go back. You know. Now, this is a stream that denounces the right people. I'm not saying that, like, I mean, I'm in a weird place when it comes to Zoomers. I actually think, like, what they care about is more international and more internationally aware than anything before the development of social media. But their ability to parse complication or nuance or even understand the historical context is, like, not there at all. It's a very immediate response. And that makes a lot of sense given how they interact with the media, right? Like how most of us interact with media. It's not just them either. Like this is not a, you are born between so-and-so years. This is why you do this. This is, you are a part of this current milieu whose younger section is currently on the up and up. What are you going to do? How do you feel about leftists embracing pre-political or quietism? I used to be a quietist, actually. I guess in some ways I am pre-political in one key sense. I do not think we've done enough to be able to build an independent political party in the imperial core of any meaning. And I don't just mean in the U.S. So the U.S. has additional problems because of its constitution. I think that is necessary, but I don't think we are there at all. And so there is a sense in which we need to go out and build these institutions workers. My issue with platypus is that, I mean, I have many, but is that I don't think they focus enough on actual worker outreach and a lot on pre-political. Pre-political means we're not at a point where we can form a political party, and quietism means that we should do like what is it that Zizek says the most radical thing to do is sometimes doing nothing. I don't think that's true. I think the most radical thing to do is to build institutions that would allow labor to coordinate together and to start planting the seeds for orientation so that these things as they happen don't get immediately recuperated or don't get totally recuperated. Because what we're seeing right now is the waves of recuperation. It's going to be hard with the Palestine protest, but it wasn't hard with Me Too, which even kind of started in the right, honestly. It wasn't hard with it wasn't hard with BLM at all. Platypus is more or less a pedagogical project. Chris Cutrone has actually talked about having a political project separate from that. It has never really gone off the air. There was the Society for the Development of the Socialist Party in America. There was an attempt to enter and be a faction within the SPUSA at one point. I believe Reed Kane was involved in that. None of that's really panned out. I wish they would focus on that stuff more because it would actually defend against the whole like their conservative tailist stuff, which I don't really think they are. I mean, and I don't just say that because I was in them. I also listened to what Chris and Spencer Leonard and stuff say very closely. I don't agree with. I consider their view of the bourgeois revolutions too Whiggish. There's a bunch of stuff where we're in disagreement, but I often think they're right about the problems of whatever left that they've been writing about, the millennial left, the Gen X left, etc. I often don't think they're right about the larger milieu, or they're too soft on elements of it. But I wish they emphasize the ability to become an independent socialist movement more than they do, because it would make it very clear what their actual agenda is. And there's a lot of things in which Chris and Spencer, if you really put them down there, yeah, I don't know, man. I'm not going to ask you to betray what state you're in, but if you can give me your region, because out here there's been a lot of sympathy. I've done, even though I generally don't do visual solidarity protests or marches because I tend to think they're a waste of time. Other than building solidarity, I have done these because I've wanted to show solidarity with the people in my community who are affected by this. I think it is particularly incumbent on me because of my ethnic background. But I have often been a little bit like cringy at them. We have now run, I have helped my partner do a little bit. It's only a little bit. She's doing most of the work. I don't want to claim any undue valor for her work. She's doing stuff on people who are dealing with like the trauma of realizing the institutions are give them are getting beat up by the cops or getting their encampment raided in the middle of the night, which is what happened here. In like UT Austin, there's this big, massive show of public force. Here it was all stealth in the middle of the night. They came in, swooped in, busted the fuck out of out of the encampment in the middle of the night, like they do homeless encampments, and left. Like, yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about either of those two groups, but I work with them locally, even if I don't like them, because they are actually out here. I have a lot of criticisms, but that's not here and there. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like, in some ways, like Democratic politicians and stuff have been much harsher on this, but in other ways, a lot of the places when they aren't busting up the encampments because of the media's eyes on them, they don't care at all. It's very interesting. Like, it's a very, oh yeah, of course, David. Like, yeah, duh. Um, it's a very weird, interesting time in that regard. Um, yeah, I remember when like salt was the only thing in Alabama. I know a few leftists in Alabama. Uh, I don't know if we met. I kind of doubt that we have. Um, but for those of you who don't know, me, I grew up in the South. My publisher of my first book of poetry is in New Orleans, and I grew up in Georgia. And I take the bus between those areas all the time, and I would stop in Alabama all the time. I get like I have some like well-off liberal friends out here. Like I won't let my non-binary partner be seen outside of Atlanta, and I'm like, you're really not in that much danger. Um, I'm a big defender of flyover country. I just am. I like it. Maybe it's big fish, small pond shit. I've been accused of that. But having grown up in mostly in Georgia and a little bit in Nova Scotia, I'm very much a periphery of the core kind of guy. Oh, the cops. Well, I don't know. I mean, they are and they aren't. Um, all right. Have fun listening to Rick Roderick. I'm about to close this off. This is actually pretty late. Um, I gotta go teach in the morning, and I was gonna record a bunch of me blathering on about text. So, 3/4 of what I do at this thing is reading essays and commenting on them to get you guys to read. I actually don't teach you that differently on this channel than I teach my students. It's kind of funny. Are you still in the classroom? I'm still a teacher. I'm not still in the classroom. I've been on the teaching first home and hospital, and then in the internet program for 3.5 years. I don't see myself leaving education anytime real soon, even though some days it's hard. I'm not gonna lie, there are days where I just don't want to work for the government anymore. And I don't even dislike the local. I mean, like, it's a weird quasi-conservative quasi-theocracy, but like, it's I don't hate it here. I really don't. I mean, we might have an arsenic cloud, because we're running out of water, and the Salt Lake Basin we've been gotten 2 good years of snow, and that's the only thing stopping it from happening. Yeah, it's hard for me to tell. I want to tell people to do it, but I can't in good conscience to say it's going to be easy. I just can't. Um, what I do is teach. I'm good at teaching. I'm kind of good at writing sometimes, as long as you don't see my first drafts. If you follow me on Facebook or Twitter and like look at my first drafts of shit, oh my god. What do you do when all the basin dries out? And I move is what I do. I move. I move. Absolutely, I move. When I lived in northern Mexico, right, and I lived in a city that has the same problem. It used all this water for its cattle ranching, and it's a place called the Laguna in the middle of the desert. And I mean, in addition to all the problems that it has of being too close to America and too far from God, it is it had all these like water contaminants and you know, people worrying about the water in Mexico. That's kind of, I mean, honestly, in certain areas, it's kind of racist. I drink tap water in Mexico City. Once you adjust to just different flora in the water, that's not totally sterilized like it is in Europe and America, you're fine. Not even everywhere in America, let's be honest. But I did get into drinking. People commented I was bougie the other day because I was drinking a La Croix. I'm like, motherfucker, I've been drinking seltzer water for like 15 years because it's always safe. Anyway. Yeah, apparently I'm good enough at writing for editing and soundboarding to be impossible. Yeah, it's I pity my editors. I very much pity my editors. Australian tap water is top quality. That's good. I've never been to Oceania. I want to. I'm no longer in a job where people pay me to fly around the world, though, so it's kind of a different deal. Man, I really miss that sometimes. But anyway. Yeah, Rowan, you've edited me actually, and you've commented on how good my writing is, and yet also how hard it is to edit. I mean, that's when I was writing fiction, which I don't do much anymore. Poor copy. Me and a copy editor is like evil. It's just evil. For those of you who don't know, I have aphasia and dyslexia, so it like I should honestly dictate what I write to something and then write and then like edit it, but you know, I don't know. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, so I was in northern Mexico, and the ranching had used most of the water in this place, so La Laguna, and the locals had splotches on their skin if they were poor because they couldn't afford to get the water tanked in, right? Like middle class and up Mexicans in this town would like buy the water. It would be like $10, and they'd bring you like 40 gallons to your house. And no, most private schools are very bad at special ed. Public schools don't take care of them right, but they at least try to take care of them. Very, very good private schools would do it. Our schools are specialized in it. Oh yeah, it's hard. I do editing work. I did editing for Zero for years. And also I used to edit I've edited literary journals for a long time. Anyway. So but in this town, the poor people they would have arsenic splotches on their skin. I mean, not enough to hurt them. I don't know what the other effects are, but yeah. So in addition to being terrorized by cartels and federales and Mexican feds and whatever, and when I say that, I think people overestimate the danger of Mexico. And I know the story about cartels. I mean, I see the cartels as tied into the government in a very real way. Nonetheless, so I don't want people to think I'm fear mongering about that either. But it was violent. Um, I saw more death there than most places. Uh, even Egypt at some of the bad points, actually. It's real interesting. Um, when you travel the world like this, uh, you see some of the worst shit that you can see, like, um, you know, oh yeah, no, the Zetas were all trained at the School of the Americas almost to a man. Um, and to fight the Zetas, something that the U.S. kind of indirectly created, or they employed making alliances with the Sinaloa cartel. So yeah. But anyway, but you see all this stuff, and you also, I never see these people as victims or just victims to the fucking world anymore. I refuse to do that too. Which is not to say that they're always morally culpable for what happens, and most of them are absolutely not. I mean, they're caught in these bigger machines that just crush and tear through people. But I refuse to focus on the victimization of that. I really think. No, it's over here too, man. Deaths of despair. Do you know how many people? Fuck me, man. I have lost to drug addiction, alcoholism, and premature uh, death from heart attacks and whatnot, like 5 people in the last 10 years. It's fucking crazy. I was going through the people that I grew up with in high school, right? That stayed in my hometown, which was very few. And they either ended up like local professionals, teachers, nurses in the town, or they're in prison or dead. Like that's pretty much like that's it. That's where you go. Like when I think about my peer group as a high schooler, most of the boys who are men that I grew up with, they're not around anymore. Not all of them. My best friend is a teacher in Florida, and um, a few other friends of mine like work blue collar jobs in central Georgia. But a lot of people have died of alcoholism, of opioids, of unhandled domestic violence. I mean, it's anyway. It's hard. And when I like deal with a lot of leftists who like on paper really care about this, and they do. I mean, I don't want to like I don't want to impugn their conscience, right? But like they can't help me when a friend from my hometown calls me in the middle of the night having delirium tremens, right? Like, and I'm the one who made good, so I'm the person they call. I don't talk about it a lot on the show. I don't want to exploit my own past, my own prior community by trying to make money off of it. Um, uh, And I'm not saying that a lot of these downwardly mobile Failson people don't have a lot of similar problems. So some of them do. Lots of lumpinization throughout the entire system, man. But that's why I haven't given up being a teacher. You know, like I've never wanted to be a left-wing celebrity, whatever the fuck that means. I did want to be an academic at one point. I've struggled with addiction myself at different times, like mostly in my youth, not recently, but I got out of it by entering a Buddhist monastery. Not gonna lie, yeah, that's what I did. But yeah, man. It was that shit, you know. It was that shit that made me both hate leftists and made me a leftist simultaneously. I mean, what made me hate leftists is when I was in college, like I would hear all about like, you know, at the time it was like Muma Abu Jamal and um, uh, Ward Churchill and um, beginnings of people talking about David Graeber and the Zapatistas, uh, and you know, then the Bush Wars. Um, hey Zoe, I've been there. Been there. All right, like you're never gonna hear me like shit on Jordan Peterson for telling people to make their bed because you need to, and there's tons of reasons to shit on him. Um, I'm doing a lot better. I'm doing a lot better. Yeah. Even this year. This year's been a last year was a trial, like, you know. Um why? I mean, he had slightly more grounds than Elizabeth Warren. Um but that's why he kind of went away. Derek Jensen was another, you know, late college. Daniel Quinn, the early primitivist movement, you know, that sort of shit. Um Oh, it's one of the things. Like people who get all like misty-eyed about right wingers really believing what they say. It's hard to live in a red state and watch right wing governments. Like I feel differently about like say tacitly conservative religious people or whatever. Like I actually don't always think that they are the stereotype we present them as. But right wing politicians and demagogues never met one. Never met one who wasn't shitty. Oh, that book, Jihad versus Macworld. Oh man. Anyway, I was about to say something. Uh, for those of you who are going through stuff, you know, I'm all about people accepting their body, but you can change your life. I don't go into it because I don't want to stigmatize people for the way they are, and I'm still technically overweight. But you know, I lost, and some of it was the side effects of surgery that I didn't have for weight loss. So I'm going to be completely honest about that, but I had because complications of typhoid. But I lost before that 120 pounds just by moving to another country, eating better. It wasn't because of like just my own willpower. It was a total change of social conditions. You know, a total change of social conditions. But I took it back with me when I came back. Right. But I don't blame anyone for struggling with that shit, particularly here. Particularly here. The last book is stalled because Shallon is still finishing her dissertation. So I'm writing another book and to pass the time. Um, and uh, that's what I'm doing. It's called either Wonktopia descends to barbarism, and I've asked to change it to why this is called or barbarism. Barbarians, essays about the millennial left. Which is about as provocative as I can be. So which I think is going to start with an essay called Wonktopia to Barbarism. It's going to end with an essay playing off of both Bordeguy and Mike Davis called In Praise of Barbarians. But you know, and it might have a chapter called It's Been All Barbarism the Whole Time. But yeah. But that's where I'm at. You know what I think a lot about? And I'm going to be he was a menace when he was a National New Left Review editor. I think a lot about right now. You know, I sound like I'm harsh on Zoomers a lot, and I don't actually want to be that guy because, you know, old man yells at cloud, right? I got gray in my hair. I deliberately grew my hair out so you can see the gray. I got tired of looking like a military brat too. I'm in my old bohemian period. But man, I've lost a lot of students. Like this year was the first year, and I can't talk much about it. I just but this year was the first year that a student under my care when it happened passed. That and I've had more students hospitalized for suicidal ideation in the past 6 years than in like the past 20. And I've been thinking about these kids a lot. It's you know, it's easy for me to get all macho and badassy all the time. You know, it's easy for me to do. You know, I have that inclination naturally. I am not, you know, I am not the one that casts the first stone on toxic masculinity. Like at all. You know. But we have failed these kids. And in like almost every way. They look around them, they don't see a future. No one's guiding them about how to build it. No one's giving them hope about what it might mean. And they're seeing the geopolitical, they're seeing the implicit barbarism of the geopolitical situation become the explicit barbarism of the geopolitical situation. And they've grown up. I mean, if you were born in if you were born in 2001, 2002, you've only known that. No one wants to be mentors to these kids. Everyone's afraid of their parents. Their parents are afraid of their kids. All their parents want to be their kid's fucking friend, as if that was healthy. And I'm not saying that you should be an authority figure to them, but like someone who's not in the age of majority cannot be my peer. When I said they were afraid of parents, I wasn't talking about the kids. The kids don't fear much of. They kind of fear me. Apparently, I'm scary. And I never force politics on my students. Never. It's not that I don't. It's not that I don't try to guide them. I don't want a bunch of reactionaries, but I do for you. Not gonna lie, but I also know you. Yeah. You know what helps my students a lot? It's not telling them, oh, it gets better. I don't ever say that shit. I don't know. I don't know if it gets better for anyone. It got better for me. My life has been getting better. My childhood was a horror story. And and I would go in and out of like lower middle class life to worse, and then back into even middle class life, and then back down. It was very unstable. But I had a home. I had a stepfather who loved me. I had a mom who did her best. I had good friends. I had a community. A lot of terrible shit happened, but stuff got better. But I don't tell people that because I've also seen it not, right? But what I tell people, what I tell kids as best I can is you're not yet formed. You are not yet formed. Your relationships will form you from here on out. And because of that, there's still hope for you. And if you need some stability, I'm going to grumpily be here. And there you go. You don't have to like me. I'm not for everybody. And that's fine. Like sometimes I make the mistake of going on Reddit and see what people say about me, which is wild. It's fucking wild. More good than bad, but some of the bad is like Varn has a shrill voice, and I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like, Varn is pretentious. I'm an egghead, but I'm not pretentious. I'm not faking it. I'm pompous. I'm an arrogant ass. I really am. Like some of you are nice about it, but I really am. But I don't fake. But it's interesting, right? Because on one hand, my response to that is a little bit defensive because everybody does, right? You don't want to get in this, but you other have to go like, you know what? Maybe these people are right. I'm not for everybody. No one needs to be for everybody. No movement needs to have a figure that everybody fucking loves. Varnblog does not take a toll because I don't pay attention to the comments very much anymore. I mean, I read them. I fight with my audience all the time. I mean, you guys know that. But I don't get bothered by it anymore. I used to a lot, man. When I was first doing podcasting, I never, ever looked at what anyone said about me. Well, for one, I'm going to tell you guys, I'm 40. I have the best relationships in my life. I have a community. I am a mentor to a lot of great young people. Number one comment: if I wanted to be spoken to like Varn, I'd talk to my dad. That's fair. Like, that's absolutely fair. You guys are actually, tonight you're seeing a relatively unguarded me. I'm not putting on the I'm a serious podcaster, fuck you face. I mean, you guys realize that that's not an act, and that I'm not faking that as part of my personality, but it's not an act. It is an exaggerated, constructed part of who I am. I mean, one, people are never one thing anyway, right? Like, you're not. I can't fix you. If I fix you, you're dead. You are absolutely dead, right? So, your life, your whatever, you're gonna have different masks. That doesn't mean you're two-faced. I mean, everyone's two-faced. Everyone's multi-faced. Like, authenticity is not about knowing your inner core and being true to whatever the fuck that is. I don't even believe in that metaphysically. What authenticity is for me is, can I relate to you as honestly as I possibly can given the context and conditions of the moment, right? And that's the important thing. And I put up a wall. Like, have you seen these fucking podcasters destroy themselves? Just rip themselves apart, performing their authenticity until it eats their lives away. I'm a poet, man. I know about what happened to the confessional poets. Anne Sexton, Robert Lowell, John Berryman, Sylvia Plath. We know how it all ends when you do that. When you turn yourself in to an object for public consumption, not as a part of a relation or a community, but something to be expressed and to become modified, you will die. Eventually. I mean, we're all going to die anyway, but like, you're accelerating that speed towards not liveness. So, I don't perform who I am for you guys, but I don't hide it either. I used to. Around the time that Mark Fisher wrote The Vampire Castle Feast, a lot of people around me started getting canceled. And I mean, like, not like, oh, we're going to start. I mean, like, people harassing them at work, calling defects on their family, that kind of shit. It turned a few of my left-wing friends right-wing. And at the time, I was a newlywed abroad, and my spouse was sick all the time, like constantly sick. It ended up being cancer. She lived, killed her marriage, blah blah blah. I'm not gonna go into that story. Don't want to make I already said about making your life public consumption. But man, I was afraid of people going after her. Because I saw people, not that people would, I don't mind people canceling people's, like, people have to be accountable for what they do. I'm not a big counselor. I believe in reconciliation of people, like, but it does require accountability, right? And accountability requires relationality and blah 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 blah. And so counseling people breaks that off. I'd rather just beat your ass, frankly. No, I know, Busker. I'm not saying you're implying that. I'm riffing. I don't think I am a bunch of masks. Like, they're real masks. That's the thing. Like, they are real masks. These are me. What you see is what you get. Oh, I was a cryotist for a long time, man. During during the time period where Mark Fisher was becoming more and more into Corbynism, I actually pulled away from politics altogether. I was not willing to talk about the situation in the Middle East because I was in Egypt and stuff was bad. I mean, when Italian students are found dead on the road, tortured, you just keep your mouth shut. And I was taking care. I was not even taken care of. I wasn't like in the room. I was earning money in Egypt to keep my spouse's insurance while she was getting cancer treatment. And the last thing I fucking wanted was a bunch of leftists running a cancel campaign and going after anyone in my family because I'd seen it. My ex-wife was just a normie liberal, man. Sweet woman. Still is. I talked to her today. And I didn't want any of that for her at all. At fucking all. And and now that it's like 8 years past, I mean, I've been divorced for now going on almost 5 years. When I was actually going through my divorce and never fucking talked about it. I don't understand why left celebrities will go through this divorced dad face shit. Like, I mean, I get it, I guess. Like, it's a big loss. It's a big trauma. Oh, yeah, no, I've seen people gun for folks like that. Absolutely seen it. I saw someone dox this guy and then it was a bunch of anarchists. It was one of these things where it turned me against some of these Antifa types. Dox this guy and this they doxed his family, even his fucking kids. Like, holy shit. It's one thing to go after another person, okay? Again, people have to be accountable. I get it. But don't fucking fuck with someone's children. They didn't do anything. He was publishing stuff for Atasha, which was this like hardcore primitivist thing. That's what they docked him for. In fact, at one point, was he a Nazi? No. I would say though, if anyone was gonna be a non-racialist eco-fascist, yeah, Atasha was what it was. And again, I'm not even saying I have a problem with them necessarily doxing him. I mean, you got to own what you do. But they went after his entire fucking family. Also, man, I'm not going to go into it, but I don't know. I know some stuff happened in Britain when people fucking with Mark Fisher's family that I can't forgive. Cannot forgive. And won't ever. And I wasn't even close to Mark. Like, I'm writing a chapter that's highly critical of him, actually. But I knew Mark as an intellectual I exchanged letters with, and he was friends with a friend of mine who's also dead now, Paul Shetler. He died just before COVID. And he's the person who helped me commission the Vampire Castle piece. He's the person who pitched it to the editorial board, got the panel on it with Sam Chris and Jody Dean and all those people, right? He back when we were running North Star, and the fallout from that was so unbelievably nasty, so fucking nasty. I think people underestimate how nasty it got. So nasty. I wasn't surprised when he died. I'll say that. I was sad. God, this is get from me being angry to me being sad. What the fuck are you guys doing? Tricking me into being all emotional and sincere and shit. I think you guys probably learned more about me in one night than I've ever said on air. So, yeah, I know. I that's why I've always published under my real name. I didn't always, like, very early on when I was in South Korea, I published under a fake name because the national security law meant that I could be deported for being a Marxist, right? So then I then I published under a pseudonym. Absolutely. And I'd also done so when I was writing zines in the 90s because it was just a thing you did. I didn't even know why I did it. I was just like a kid. But when I left Korea in 2013 for Mexico, I vowed I wouldn't talk about Mexican politics or narco stuff at all while I was there, but that I wasn't going to hide my identity anymore. Louis project out of me anyway. So it's kind of an asshole thing to do. Although it's funny, he accused other people of being me. So that was also pretty hilarious. So you don't know what a zine is? A zine is just an independent it's just an independent magazine, you know, that's usually stapled together because people made them out of Xerox copies, right? I came out of the DIY world in the 90s, you know. Oh yeah, and I wrote some terrible shit. God, I'm so glad I'm not young today, man. If you guys could dig up all my writings from my teens and early 20s, one, you'd think I was a fucking reactionary because I was. I mean, you know, oh, I don't think people still make them anymore. The internet kind of killed the need for them, Baki. Like, even by the time I was done with high school, we were moving to like email letters and whatnot that we would run right out of the school library. So yeah, I still see them in the punk scene in like certain coastal cities, but they're kind of like people who listen to stuff on Victrola. It's like deliberately anachronistic. Yeah, well, you know, CDs are still a thing in Portland too. Oh my god! One day you have to like, I got to go back to Portland and do Varn covers Portland and makes everyone hate him. Like it's just, yeah. All right, quick round of questions. It's midnight. We've been going for 3 hours. I didn't plan on doing this. You guys have improved my mood, and I didn't threaten anyone tonight. Oh my god. There was no outburst of anger, which is weird because I actually started this angry. Like I was kind of looking for a fight. So, any last questions? Oh, I can drive to Portland, man. It's like 8 hours away. Yeah, I know. I didn't. No one got challenged to a duel tonight. Are baristas working class or not? They're working class. I can't even say they're non-productive labor because they actually sell a commodity. It's a commodity you consume right there, but they're a commodity. Would you do it? I prefer fist. Honestly, I don't really like the idea of killing people. Drake or Kendrick? Oh man, Kendrick has more fucked up politics, but he's got better bars. So, would you duel in Yu-Gi-Oh? I'm old school. I prefer Magic. I would say though, I do like a good fight. Like maybe this is the working class in me. Which left podcaster would your second be your second in a duel? Probably Jason Miles. He's got guns. I've seen him in real life. Although Danny Bessler is really nihilistic, so maybe if I just wanted someone who didn't care. How does a Gen Z become your student? You have to live in Utah. How many good artists have good politics? Very few. Poets in particular, man. I don't know what that's about. Like poets have the most radical cultural politics and the most milk toast ass actual politics. It's okay. So someone else is decidedly petit bourgeois. I don't know. We're adjacent. Did you ever watch old MMA promotions like Pride FC? Dude, I watched old MMA like when it was still different styles of fighting, and we watched it on videotapes, and like the Gracie brothers won every time. Thoughts on Kanye West? This is why you don't let artists have politics. Plato isn't right. You get to be in the Republic. I mean, Plato wasn't wrong about one thing, and you're gonna get to be in the Republic, or you get to be an artist. Badgelon's, Badgelon calls me a badger, but man, I think that guy's. You know what? If he was in good health, Matt Christman's ridiculously tall. So he's got good arm reach. So if you want that's probably my answer. Christman, just because he's big, like just got long arms. Not today though, so we're gonna have to retract that. Tilly's better. May he be our dueling partner in fisticuffs again, or ever. Is Doom Messiah your favorite Boom book? I love Doom Messiah and I love God Emperor. I'm a weirdo. My truck driving uncle introduced me to Dune when I was I think 5 years old. Yeah, I was young. I didn't read it then. I watched the David Lynch movie, which is objectively not good, even though I love it because I was raised on it. It's the same reason most people love Star Wars. Was the best. My favorite movies as a child were like Flash Gordon, Dune, and The Last Starfighter, if you remember that shit. That tells you how old I am, man. I am older than I look. Fucking ancient. Only Doug Lane is older on the left. No, I'm kidding. I think maybe that's true though. On Left Podcasters, I don't think. I guess the Regrettable Brothers are my age. Felix Betterman. Oh, that's good. I don't know much about the Chapo people. I mean, any tips on looking young? Weightlift and hate things. I don't have a lot of wrinkles because I don't express a lot of emotion. Oh yeah, stay out of the sun. Oh yeah, sunscreen. Yeah, but my parents didn't have it at all. My parents looked real old by my age. Like my mom looked really old by my age. Anyway, all right. You guys asked some cool questions, I guess. I have a shirt that says "Surviving out of pure spite." It is one of my favorite shirts. Is film anachronistic? You mean it looks better than digital sometimes? You are right. Korean skincare, man. Not gonna lie, I did learn moisturizer because they were cheap there. And I grew up also. I've lived in the. I went from living in a very moist climate to living in the desert, which both age people, but somehow going from one to the other helps. I don't know. So, but I'm terrified of skin cancer because it's almost took out my ex-wife and it took out my uncle. So I am very careful in the sun. I go outside all the time. I garden all the time. I know you guys think I'm just constantly at a computer, but because I'm at a computer so much, like when I'm not doing this or teaching or writing curriculum, I'm gardening or I'm lifting weights. That's what I do. So stay on it. I also limit the amount of alcohol I consume. I don't smoke and I do very few jokes. So oh, my desk is a fucking wreck. But I don't read at my desk. I read in my bed before I go to sleep every day. How many sets of 10 can you bitch? Like 10K? Oh, reps of 10. I mean, I don't bench that much. I do a whole lot of strongman lifting, actually. I get several hundred over my head. All right. Well, I didn't expect this to become Varn teaches you beauty tips because you know my mug. I just don't age. I'm totally. What is it? Universal sevens? Like, yeah, that's the best we're doing, and I'm okay with that. I do fine. Oh, dude, I do. I literally do flip a tractor tire for training. You're not wrong. And I use a barrel barbell too. So Mormons eat too much sugar, man. When you only have one vice, and it's sugar, it's in everything. I mean, they have great desserts here, but they'll kill you. Oh yeah, man. Not if you do it right. Although I have hip arthritis too. Now I'm telling you how to defeat me in a fight, and we can't have that. We've already talked about duels. So I'm gonna get some bed. I'm now completely rambling. I had a rant and it's totally gone off, and now we're just talking about weird shit. Is this why people do streams? Bizarre. All right. Speaking of which, I need to go get some rest, and I'm not on Pacific time, guys. I'm a mountain person. I live in the mountain desert. It's after midnight. Um, so anyway, take care. Have a great rest of your days. Get some rest, those of you who rest. I mean, I think sleep is for the weak, but apparently the weak live longer. So take care.